On Christmas Eve, a lonely businessman is once again rejected, despite being surrounded by luxury and prestige. But everything changes when a little girl approaches him and, with an innocent question, breaks through his wall of loneliness. In the simplicity of that gesture, he finds what he never had, true affection, and a place where he finally feels he belongs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now our story. The night of December 24th fell over New York City, with the humid heat typical of a New York summer. The streets of the Upper East Side glittered with Christmas lights, and shop windows displayed golden decorations that reflected the neighborhood's luxury. Michael Taylor navigated his motorized wheelchair along the wide sidewalk, observing the couples passing by hand in hand. The families gathered at restaurant entrances, the festive buzz that seemed to amplify his own loneliness. At 45, Michael was the owner of one of the country's largest tech companies. His business was thriving, his bank account was enviable, and his name regularly appeared on lists of New York's most influential entrepreneurs. But that night, wearing an impeccable Italian suit and heading to a restaurant where he had a reservation, he felt the suffocating weight of every Christmas Eve he had spent alone since the accident. The accident. Michael avoided thinking about that September day 23 years ago, when he was just 22 with the whole world ahead of him, a young university student full of dreams, driving down the highway towards the coast with friends. The crash that changed everything, the surgeries, the wheelchair that became an extension of his body. And then, over the years, the people who drifted away, the pitying glances, the potential partners who vanished after the first date. He had built an empire, proving to himself and the world that his disability did not define his abilities. But professional success never filled the void he felt when he returned to his penthouse apartment and found himself alone, surrounded by designer furniture and a panoramic view of the city that seemed more like a constant reminder that he was on the outside of the life everyone else was living. That night, however, Michael had hope. He had met Adrienne through a dating app. She was beautiful, successful, a lawyer at a major firm. In their text conversations, she had seemed interested, kind, even enthusiastic about their date. Michael hadn't mentioned the wheelchair, but he planned to do so in person, believing that a face-to-face meeting would allow her to see him as a whole man, not just a physical condition. The Manhattan Bistro was one of the most sophisticated restaurants in the area. Michael arrived 10 minutes early, as he always did, and asked to be taken to his reserved table by the window. The room was filled with elegant couples, celebrating families, and groups of friends toasting. The tables had pristine white cloths, discreet floral arrangements, and lit candles that created a romantic atmosphere. He ordered water and waited, adjusting his jacket, mentally rehearsing how he would start the conversation. Slowly, the minutes ticked by. 15, 20, 30 minutes. Michael checked his phone a few times, looking for a message about her being late, but there was nothing. When 40 minutes had passed, he saw a woman in a red dress enter the restaurant, look around, and approach the reception desk. It was Adrienne. He recognized her from the photos, though she was even more elegant in person. Michael made a discreet gesture with his hand, and she looked in his direction. For a brief moment their eyes met, but then her gaze dropped, noticed the wheelchair, and Michael saw her expression change completely. First surprise, then embarrassment, and finally something he knew all too well, that mixture of discomfort and poorly disguised rejection. Adrienne approached the table but didn't sit down. She remained standing, clutching her designer bag tightly, and Michael felt his stomach clench, already knowing what was coming. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, avoiding direct eye contact. "You didn't mention that that you had this condition. I wasn't expecting this." Michael swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm the same person you've been talking to for weeks. The chair doesn't change who I am." Adrienne shrugged, and the coldness in her voice cut deeper than any knife. "Look, no offense, but I was expecting someone different, someone whole. You know, I don't have time for complications in my life. Sorry, but this isn't going to work." She turned and left before he could respond. Michael sat there, frozen, feeling all the eyes in the restaurant on him. Some looked away, others whispered, and he felt humiliation burn in his throat. He picked up his water and drank, trying to contain the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. The waiter approached, embarrassed, asking if he would like to order. Michael almost got up and left, but something inside him refused to let that woman have the power to completely ruin his night. He ordered a glass of wine and a random dish, not even paying attention to what it was, just not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing him leave defeated. While he waited, he observed the restaurant around him, couples toasting, laughing, kissing, a family celebrating with excited children, two friends enthusiastically discussing business. Everyone seemed to belong to that world of affection and connection, everyone but him. Michael was lost in these dark thoughts when he felt a light touch on his arm. He turned and saw a little girl, no more than 3 years old, with brown hair in 2 little pigtails and big, curious eyes. She was standing next to his chair, wearing a simple, slightly wrinkled blue polka-dot dress, and looking at him with a serious expression. "Why are you sad?" the girl asked with the brutal honesty only children possess. Michael was speechless for a moment. No one had ever asked him that. People assumed, ignored, looked away. But this small child simply asked as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I'm just thinking," he replied, not knowing exactly what to say. "But you're sad. I saw you from over there. My mummy says that when we're sad, we need a hug." Before Michael could answer, the girl had already moved closer and hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck. It was such a pure, unpretentious gesture that Michael felt something break inside him. For a moment he allowed himself to receive that hug, and a stubborn tear escaped his eye. "Isabella, Isabella, come here right now," a woman's voice called, rushed and worried. Michael looked up and saw a woman approaching quickly. She looked to be around 28, wearing a simple employee uniform, her hair tied back in a practical bun, and her face was marked by a weariness that went beyond the physical. She was naturally beautiful, without makeup or adornments, and her eyes showed both worry and embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, sir, really sorry," the woman said, taking the girl by the hand and trying to pull her away. "She came out of the kitchen. She's not supposed to be out here. 1,000 apologies. Please don't complain to the manager. I need this job." Michael raised a hand, trying to calm her. "No, please, it's no problem. At all. She was just keeping me company. I won't complain about anything." The woman still seemed nervous, her eyes darting from her daughter to Michael, assessing the situation. "She's very curious. She always does this. I'm so sorry for the bother." It wasn't a bother. In fact, she brightened my evening. The girl looked at her mother and said with complete naturalness, "He was sad, Mommy. I gave him a hug, like you taught me." The mother sighed, torn between pride in her daughter's kindness and fear of causing a problem. Michael noticed her tension and suddenly had an "dear." He didn't want the two of them to leave. He didn't want to return to the loneliness of his table. "Have you two eaten yet?" he asked. The woman blinked, surprised. "What?" "I asked if you've eaten. I'm here alone, and I would be delighted to have some company. Please sit with me." "No, sir, we can't. I'm working, and it wouldn't be appropriate. Besides, I don't have the money to pay." Michael sensed the sincerity and pride in her words. "I'm not asking you to pay for anything. I'm inviting you, and if you're working, when is your break?" "I don't have a formal break. I work until closing. I brought Isabella because I couldn't get a spot at daycare, and I had no one to leave her with. The manager allowed it as long as she stayed quiet in the kitchen." "And is she being quiet?" Michael smiled, looking at the girl, who was now observing everything with interest. The woman almost smiled but held back. "Not always." "Then let her stay here with me for a bit. You can eat together later, but for now she can keep a lonely man company on Christmas. What's your name?" Julia Sanchez, and this is Isabella." "A pleasure, Julia. I'm Michael, and I would be honored if you would accept my invitation." Julia hesitated, but Isabella was already pulling up a chair and sitting down next to Michael. The woman sighed, knowing she had lost that battle. "Just for a little while, then. And if the manager shows up, I'll have to go back." Michael nodded, and Julia sat down, clearly uncomfortable. The waiter approached, surprised, and Michael ordered 2 more meals without even asking what they wanted. Julia tried to protest, but he gently interrupted her. Isabella looked around the room with enchantment. She had never been in the main part of the restaurant. The shiny silverware, the crystal glasses, the lit candles. It was all magical to her. "It's so pretty here," she whispered. "You think so?" Michael asked. "Uh-huh, it's like a castle." Michael smiled, and it was a genuine smile for the first time that night. "And are you a princess?" Isabella shook her head. "No, I'm just Isabella, but my mommy is beautiful like a princess." Julia blushed, clearly embarrassed. "Isabella, don't say things like that." "But it's true, Mommy." The man here agrees. "Right, mister?" Michael looked at Julia, really seeing her for the first time. Beneath the fatigue and the simple uniform, there was a serene beauty, a quiet strength. "She is," he replied, and saw Julia look away, flustered. The food arrived, and Michael watched Julia serve her daughter carefully, cutting the food into small pieces, making sure she didn't burn herself. There was such evident love in every gesture that Michael felt a pang of envy. When was the last time someone had cared for him like that? They ate in an initially uncomfortable silence, but gradually Isabella's presence broke down the barriers. The girl chattered about everything, told confusing stories from school, and asked about Michael's chair with the innocent curiosity of someone who sees no limitations. "Do you ride in that chair because you're tired?" she asked. "No, it's because my legs don't work like yours, but I can still go everywhere." Isabella processed that and nodded. "So you're smart. My mommy says when one thing doesn't work, you find another way." Michael looked at Julia, who looked like she wanted to disappear from embarrassment. "Your mother is very wise." The meal ended, but Michael didn't want it to be over. Julia stood up saying she had to get back to work, and he felt a tightness in his chest. "Please, when you finish, let me take you home. It's late, and it's not safe to take the bus at this hour." "There's no need, Mr. Taylor. We'll manage." "I know you'll manage, but I'd like to do this, please." Julia stared at him, trying to understand his intentions. Michael held her gaze, letting her see there were no ulterior motives, just a lonely man who had found a bit of humanity on a cold night. "Okay," she finally agreed, "but just to our door." Michael waited in the restaurant. Isabella stayed with him, and they talked about cartoons, school, and Christmas. The girl told him she had asked Santa for a doll, but didn't know if he would come because they didn't have a Christmas tree at home. When Julia finished her shift, it was already past midnight. She returned wearing simple clothes, jeans and a faded blouse, carrying a worn-out backpack. Isabella was already sleepy, and Michael offered to carry her in his lap as they moved to his adapted car. Julia was impressed when she saw the vehicle. It was a luxury SUV perfectly adapted for him to drive, with the wheelchair locking into the driver's seat. She sat in the back with Isabella, who fell asleep almost immediately. The drive to their home was quiet. Julia gave the address, a community in the Bronx, and Michael drove without asking questions. When they arrived, it was a block of simple houses, narrow streets, a reality so distant from the world of luxury he came from. "This is it," Julia said, her voice low. "Thank you for everything. Isabella had a wonderful time. I did too. Can I come back tomorrow, maybe? To spend Christmas with you?" Julia looked at him as if he were crazy. "Why? Why would you want to do that?" "Because tonight was the first night in a long time that I didn't feel alone." Julia was silent, processing his words. Finally, she nodded. "You can come, but it's nothing fancy, you know. We barely have enough to eat." "I'll bring the food. I just want the company." Julia got out of the car, lifted a sleeping Isabella into her arms, and turned before going inside. "See you tomorrow, then." "See you tomorrow," Michael replied, and for the first time in years he looked forward to the morning with anticipation, not dread. When he arrived home at his silent, luxurious apartment, Michael didn't feel the usual emptiness. He felt something different, something he couldn't yet name, but it warmed his chest and made Christmas finally seem to have some meaning. Julia, for her part, laid Isabella on the narrow bed they shared in the single room of their apartment. She looked around at the peeling walls, the old furniture, the poverty she tried so hard to hide, and she wondered what that rich man really wanted. People like him didn't get close to people like her for no reason, but then she remembered the way he had looked at Isabella with genuine tenderness, the way he hadn't treated them with disdain or pity, but with respect, and she decided to give him a chance, just one, because Christmas was a time for hope, even for someone who had learned not to expect anything anymore. Isabella stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about castles and nice men, and Julia smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. Maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different from the others. December 25th dawned warm in New York City. Michael woke up early, something unusual for him in recent years. Holidays were typically days he spent in bed late, postponing the moment he had to face the emptiness of his apartment as long as possible. But that day something was different, an expectation he hadn't felt in decades. He showered, put on casual clothes, jeans and a blue polo shirt, and went to the nearest supermarket. He filled his cart with more food than 2 people and a child could possibly eat, but he couldn't stop adding things: turkey, ham, stuffing, fruits, sodas, juices, desserts. And in the toy aisle he stopped in front of the dolls. He remembered Isabella talking about her wish for Santa and chose the prettiest one he could find, complete with accessories and outfits. On the way to the Bronx, Michael felt a strange anxiety. What if Julia had changed her mind? What if it was all just politeness and she didn't really want him there? But it was too late to turn back. He was already on the narrow street, looking for the number she had given him the night before. The house was smaller than he had imagined. A simple brick building with a worn wooden door and a small barred window. There was no doorbell, so Michael knocked on the door, his heart pounding in a way it never did, even in his most important business meetings. Julia opened the door and Michael saw the surprise in her eyes. It was as if she truly hadn't believed he would come. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders, and she was wearing denim shorts and a simple t-shirt, her feet bare. Without the work uniform, without the exhaustion of the previous night, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "You came," she said, not as a question, but as a statement filled with astonishment. "I said I would. I brought some things for lunch. I hope you don't mind." Julia looked at his car, saw the bags on the back seat, and something in her face hardened. "Michael, this is too much. We don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's Christmas, and I would very much like to spend it with you, if the invitation is still open." Before Julia could answer, Isabella came running through the door, still in her pajamas, her little face lit up. "Mr. Michael, you came back!" The girl's pure joy melted away any resistance Julia might have had. She sighed and stepped aside. "Come in, but I'm warning you, there's no luxury here. It's all very simple." Michael entered, and the contrast with his apartment was stark. The house had one main room that served as a living room and bedroom, with a twin bed against the wall, an old sofa, and a small television on a wooden crate. An improvised curtain separated a tiny area that must have been the kitchen, and a door led to a cramped bathroom. The walls had damp spots, but they were clean, and there was a clear effort to make the space a home. Isabella's drawings were taped to the walls, a colourful cloth covered the plastic table, and small pots with plants sat on the windowsill. "It's small, but it's ours," Julia said, a mix of shame and pride in her voice. "It's cozy," Michael replied, and it was true. There was more human warmth in that tiny room than in all the square footage of his penthouse. Isabella pulled Michael by the hand, showing him her treasures, her collection of colourful pebbles, the children's books Julia bought at second-hand shops, the drawings she had made at school. Michael paid attention to every detail, listened to every story, and felt something inside him, a part that had been dormant for so long, slowly waking up. Julia watched from the kitchen, where she began to unpack the groceries Michael had brought. There was enough food for a week, maybe more. She felt tears burn her eyes, but held them back. She couldn't allow herself to hope. Rich men didn't stay. They came, amused themselves with the novelty, and then disappeared when They realized poverty wasn't romantic. It was hard and unforgiving. "Can I help?" Michael asked, appearing at the kitchen entrance. Julia almost laughed. "Do you know how to cook?" "Not much, but I can peel potatoes." She hesitated, then handed him a knife and a bag of potatoes. Michael positioned his wheelchair in front of the small sink and began the task. He was clumsy, peeling too thickly, but there was a concentration on his face that made Julia smile for the first time since he had arrived. "You've never done this before, have you?" Michael looked at her and smiled, admitting, "I have staff at home, but I've always wanted to learn, never had the chance." "The chance? You have all the money in the world." "Money doesn't teach you how to live. It only teaches you how to buy substitutes for life." Julia fell silent, processing his words. There was a genuine sadness in his voice, a loneliness she recognized because she felt the same thing, just for opposite reasons. She was poor, he was rich, but they were both alone. They cooked together, Julia giving instructions, Michael executing them as best he could. Isabella would pop in, from time to time, stealing pieces of fruit, asking random questions, filling the space with her childish energy. And slowly, the tension dissolved, replaced by something lighter, more natural. When lunch was ready, they set up the small plastic table in the middle of the room. There wasn't enough space for Michael's chair to pass comfortably, so he transferred himself to the old sofa, and Julia tucked the chair in a corner. The three of them sat, Isabella between them, and Julia said a simple prayer before they ate. Michael wasn't religious, hadn't prayed in years, but at that moment, he bowed his head and listened to Julia's words, thanking God for the food, for their health, for their blessings, and including a special thank you for the new friend who had appeared in their lives. When she finished, Michael felt a lump in his throat. The food was delicious. It wasn't sophisticated, there were no elaborate culinary techniques, but it tasted of home, of affection, of care. Michael ate more than he had in months, and when Julia asked if he wanted seconds, he accepted without hesitation. After lunch, Isabella was restless and Michael remembered the gift. "I brought something for you," he said, and the little girl's face lit up. "For me?" "For you." He went out to the car with some difficulty on the bumpy streets and returned with the doll wrapped in colorful paper. Isabella tore the paper with enthusiasm, and when she saw the doll, her eyes widened with pure happiness. She hugged the doll, then hugged Michael, then hugged Julia, shouting with joy. Julia looked at Michael, tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. She deserves it." "Everyone deserves things," Julia said quietly, "but not everyone gets them." The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant slowness. Isabella played with her doll, creating elaborate stories, and they watched, laughing at her imaginary adventures. Michael told stories about his company, about trips he had taken, always adapting them so Isabella could understand. Julia spoke little, but when she did, it was with a frankness Michael rarely encountered in his social circle. She told him about the struggle of raising Isabella alone, about the girl's father who had disappeared when he found out she was pregnant, about the multiple jobs she worked to pay the bills, cleaning at the restaurant at night, working as a day cleaner when she could, cleaning houses for families. She slept little, ate even less, but never let Isabella go without. "You're very strong," Michael said. Julia shrugged. "I don't have a choice. The weak don't survive. But you're not just strong. You're generous, you're loving. Isabella is a happy child because of you." Julia looked at her daughter, who was now getting sleepy, and her face softened. "She's my life. Everything I do is for her." As the sun began to set, Michael knew he had to go, but he didn't want to. He suggested coming back the next day, and Julia hesitated for so long that he felt his heart clench, expecting a rejection. But then she nodded. "You can come, but don't bring any more food. I don't want you to think we're taking advantage." "I don't think that, but I promise I won't overdo it." In the following days, Michael developed a routine. He would wake up early, handle the most urgent company matters from home, and in the late afternoon, he would go to Julia's house. At first, he would knock on the door with uncertainty, always expecting her. to say it wasn't a good time. But soon Isabella started waiting by the window, and when she saw his car, she would run to open the door before he even knocked. Michael started taking Isabella to school, as it was on his way. Julia protested at first, saying the girl could take the school bus, but Michael insisted it was no trouble. And the truth was, he loved those drives. Isabella chattered non-stop, telling him about her friends, her teachers, her games, and Michael listened to it all, absorbing this childish world he had never really known. At the school, the other mothers looked on with curiosity. Who was this man in a wheelchair who dropped off and picked up the little girl? Some whispered, speculating, but Isabella always said with pride, "This is my friend, Michael," and the purity with which she spoke silenced any malicious gossip. Julia, for her part, began to open up more. She told him about her difficult childhood, raised by a single mother who had died when Julia was 20, about the dreams she'd had of studying, of becoming a teacher, dreams that were left behind when reality hit, about the constant fear of not being able to give Isabella what she deserved. One evening, after Isabella had fallen asleep, Michael and Julia were talking on the old sofa. The television was on with the volume low, but neither of them was paying attention. Michael had transferred from his chair to the sofa, as he always did, and Julia was sitting on the other end, her feet tucked under her. "Can I ask you a question?" Julia said hesitantly. "Of course." "Why are you here, really?" "I don't believe it's just because of Isabella." Michael was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because for the first time in 23 years since the accident, I feel seen, not as the rich businessman, not as the wheelchair user who inspires pity, but as Michael. Just Michael." Julia looked at him, really looked, and saw beyond the expensive clothes, beyond the wheelchair, beyond the glaring difference between their worlds. She saw a lonely man, starved for real connection, who had found in her humble home something all his money couldn't buy. "I feel seen too," she admitted, her voice low. "People look at me and see the cleaner, the poor woman, the single mother. But you look at me and see Julia." They sat in silence, a comfortable silence, filled with mutual understanding. And in that moment, something changed between them. It was no longer just about Isabella. It was about the two of them too. In the following months, Michael became a part of their lives. He helped with the monthly groceries, took Isabella to the doctor when needed, and attended school meetings. Julia resisted at first, but gradually she allowed him further into their lives. She saw how Isabella blossomed with a male presence, how she looked at Michael with adoration, how she began to call him Uncle Michael, with increasing affection. One day, after a school party, Isabella ran up to Michael and hugged him, shouting, "Daddy!" Michael froze, and so did Julia. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning and danger. That night, after Isabella was asleep, Julia confronted Michael. "She's calling you Dad. This can't happen." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. "I didn't ask her to call me that." "I know, but she is. And it scares me, Michael. Because what happens when you get tired of this life, when you realize it's easier to go back to your world of luxury? You'll leave and my daughter will be destroyed." "I'm not going to leave." "You can't promise that." Michael looked at her with all the sincerity he possessed. "Julia, I don't want to leave, I want to stay. I want to be a part of this family if you'll let me." Julia felt tears roll down her cheeks. "You don't understand. Men like you don't stay with women like me. It doesn't work that way." "Who says it doesn't? Who made those rules?" "The world did. Life did." Michael moved closer, took her hand, and for the first time allowed himself to be completely vulnerable. "I've spent 23 years building walls. I convinced myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need anyone. But the truth is, I was dying inside. And you two brought me back to life. You brought me back, Julia." She looked at him, at those eyes that for the first time showed fear of losing something precious, and felt her own barriers begin to crumble. But there was still so much fear. Fear of believing, fear of surrendering, fear of watching it all fall apart. "I need you to understand something," she said, her voice trembling. "My daughter is my priority. If you stay, it's forever. It can't be temporary. Because if you leave, you won't just hurt me. You'll destroy Isabella. And I can't allow that." Michael squeezed her hand. "I understand, and I promise I won't leave. I'll stay for as long as you'll have me." Julia closed her eyes, and when she opened them, a decision had been made. Then stay. Be a part of this family, but for real, Michael, not as a visitor, as someone who belongs. Michael felt something release inside him, as if chains he had carried for decades had finally been broken. "I want that. More than anything, I want that." They stood there, hands intertwined, and for the first time, they both allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, people from such different worlds could build something real together. It wouldn't be easy. There would be judgments, obstacles, prejudices. But at that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that two lonely hearts had found each other, and a little girl had been the bridge that united them. Isabella stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, and they both looked at her. That little girl, with her pure heart and her infinite capacity to love, had changed everything. She had seen beyond appearances, beyond differences, and had simply loved. And in doing so, she had taught two wounded adults that true love recognizes no barriers. It simply exists, pure and transformative, asking only that people have the courage to accept it. The following months were the most intense and transformative Michael had ever lived. His routine changed completely. The penthouse apartment, once his silent and solitary refuge, now seemed like just a place where he slept. His real home was that small room in the Bronx, where Julia and Isabella waited for him every afternoon. He started working less, delegating more responsibilities to his team. For the first time in decades, his life didn't revolve solely around the company. There were school meetings to attend, Isabella's friends' birthday parties, Sunday afternoons at the nearest playground. Simple things Michael had never experienced, and that now became the best moments of his week. Julia changed too. The constant exhaustion on her face began to fade. Michael had convinced her to quit one of her jobs, promising to help with the monthly expenses. She resisted fiercely, her pride wounded by the idea of depending on someone, but he argued that it wasn't about money. It was about her having quality time with Isabella, being able to sleep more, being able to live instead of just survive. The community where they lived watched everything with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. A rich man in a wheelchair visiting a single cleaning lady daily. The gossip ran wild. Some said he was taking advantage, others that she was a gold digger. But Julia learned to ignore the comments just as Michael learned to disregard the curious stares. Mr. Oswald, the cook at the restaurant who protected Julia as if she were his own daughter, was the most skeptical of all. He pulled Michael aside one day and spoke bluntly. "Look here, son. I know you have money, power, all that, but Julia isn't one of those women. She's serious, hard-working, and that little girl is her life. If you're playing with their feelings, you better stop now before it's too late." Michael looked at the older man, saw the genuine concern, and answered with the same frankness. "I'm not playing. I love them, both of them, and I'll do everything I can to take care of them." Mr. Oswald studied Michael's face for a long moment, searching for signs of a lie, and apparently found none. He nodded slowly. "All right then. But just so you know, if you hurt them, you'll have to answer to me." Michael smiled. "I accept those terms." It was on a May afternoon, as autumn began to cool New York, that Michael received an invitation to the annual charity gala for the New York Business Association. It was one of the most important events on the social calendar of the city's elite, bringing together major names from business, politics, and society. Michael usually went alone, greeted the necessary people, made his donation, and left as quickly as possible. But that year, for the first time, he didn't want to go alone. He wanted to take Julia and Isabella. He wanted to introduce them to his world, to show everyone that he had a family now. Not a conventional family, but a real one, built on love and choice. When he proposed the idea, Julia was paralyzed. "Are you crazy? I can't go to an event like that. I don't have the right clothes, I don't know how to act in those places, and Isabella will be bored. Besides, people will judge me. They'll know I'm a cleaner, that I come from the Bronx. Michael held her hands. I want you to go. I want you to see this part of my life too, and I don't care what people think. You're important to me, both of you are. But Julia shook her head, fear evident in her eyes. I don't belong in that world, Michael. I'll feel like a fish out of water, and worse, I'll embarrass you. You could never embarrass me. Julia, I've spent months here in your world. Let me show you mine. Don't worry about clothes. I'll take care of it. I just need you to trust me. Julia looked at Isabella, who was playing on the floor with the doll Michael had given her for Christmas. The girl was humming softly, oblivious to the adult conversation, immersed in her world of fantasy. She thought of all the times Michael had been there, how he had humbled himself to step down from his pedestal and enter a world that was completely foreign to him, and she felt she owed him the same. Okay, she finally agreed, but do you promise you'll stay by my side the whole time? That you won't leave me alone there? I promise. I won't leave your side for a second. The following week, Michael took Julia to a discreet boutique on Park Avenue. He had arranged everything in advance with the owner, an elegant woman named Beatrice, who had known him for years and who treated Julia with genuine respect, without the disguised contempt Julia had expected to find. Beatrice helped Julia choose a simple but elegant navy blue dress that enhanced her natural beauty without being flashy. She also found an outfit for Isabella, a white dress with lace details that made the girl feel like a princess when she looked in the mirror. On the day of the event, Michael arrived early to pick them up. When Julia opened the door, he was speechless. She was beautiful, not because of the dress or the discreet makeup a neighbor had helped her with, but because of the nervous sparkle in her eyes, the courage that emanated from her as she stepped out of her comfort zone. You look perfect, he said, and it wasn't flattery. It was the honest truth. Isabella twirled in her new dress, making the skirt fly, and Michael smiled, his heart tightening with affection. His girls, his family. The event was at the Grand Hyatt, one of New York's most luxurious hotels. When they arrived, Julia squeezed Michael's hand so tightly it hurt, but he didn't complain. He could feel her nervousness, her insecurity, and he made sure to move slowly, introducing each person who greeted them, always including Julia and Isabella in the conversation. At first, people were polite. They greeted them, smiled, made generic comments about the weather or the event's decor. But Michael saw the looks, the whispers, the raised eyebrows as they passed. Everyone wanted to know who this woman and child were that Michael Taylor had brought with him. Julia noticed it too. She saw the women in designer gowns looking at her simple dress with poorly disguised disdain. She heard the snippets of conversations, the whispered comments, and with every minute she felt more out of place, more inadequate. Isabella, oblivious to the tensions, was enchanted by the atmosphere. The enormous ballroom with crystal chandeliers, the tables decorated with flowers, the waiters offering canapes on silver trays. She held Julia's hand with one hand and Michael's with the other, her wide eyes taking in every detail. They sat at a table near the stage, and Michael chatted animatedly with the people around them, making sure to include Julia in the conversations. But she could barely respond, paralyzed by shyness and nerves. It was when Patricia Mendez approached the table that everything began to unravel. Patricia was one of New York's most well-known socialites, the wife of a powerful banker and notorious for her sharp tongue, and her social cruelty disguised as frankness. "Michael, darling," she said, her voice loud and theatrical. "It's been ages. I haven't seen you at these things in forever. And who are these, your dates for the evening?" Michael smiled, tension in his jaw. "Patricia, this is Julia and this is Isabella. They are very important to me." Patricia looked Julia up and down, her gaze dissecting every detail, and smiled, but it was a predator's smile. "How interesting. Where do you two know each other from?" "We met through Julia's work," Michael replied, deliberately vague. But Patricia wasn't the type to give up easily. "And what work would that be, dear?" she asked Julia directly. Julia swallowed hard, feeling all eyes at the table on her. I work in a restaurant." "Oh, how lovely," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "And you brought your daughter to the event. How cute. But don't you think it's a bit inappropriate to bring children to an adult function?" Michael felt anger begin to boil, but before he could respond, Julia stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, I need to take Isabella to the restroom." She left quickly, practically dragging Isabella with her, and Michael was torn between following them and not creating a scene. Patricia laughed, that cruel, calculated laugh. "Michael, honestly, what are you doing with this woman? She's a cleaner, isn't she? You can have anyone you want, and you choose a nobody with a child in tow? Are you having some sort of midlife crisis?" Michael opened his mouth to respond, to defend Julia, to put Patricia in her place. But then he looked around, saw all the important people watching, waiting for his reaction, and he felt the old fear return. The fear of judgment, of exclusion, of being the butt of a joke. He hesitated, and in that hesitation he lost the moment to act. Patricia interpreted his silence as agreement and continued. "Look, I understand loneliness, but this is ridiculous. You're lowering yourself, Michael, and everyone here knows it, even if no one has the guts to say it to your face." Michael finally found his voice, but it was weak, defensive. "You don't know anything about her, Patricia. Julia is an incredible woman." Of course, Patricia shrugged, "but incredible in her world, not in ours. Let's be honest, Michael. She'll never belong here, and you know it." The words cut deep, because they touched on Michael's secret fear. The fear that he was asking too much of Julia, that he was forcing a situation that would never work. He fell silent, and that silence was his greatest betrayal. Julia didn't go to the restroom. She left the ballroom breathing heavily, holding Isabella's hand. She stopped in the hallway, leaned against the cold wall, and let the tears fall. Isabella looked up at her, frightened. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Julia knelt, quickly wiped her tears and tried to smile. "It's nothing, sweetie. Mommy just got a little nervous." But the truth was, it wasn't just nerves, it was humiliation, it was anger, it was the confirmation of all her fears. She didn't belong in that world. She never would. And Michael, in the moment she needed him most, hadn't defended her. She saw the hesitation in him, the embarrassed silence, and she understood. He was ashamed of her. When Michael finally managed to break away from the conversation and went to find them, he found Julia already leaving the hotel, a confused Isabella at her side. "Julia," he called, speeding up his wheelchair. "Wait." But she didn't stop. She kept walking and he had to follow, catching up to them only on the sidewalk. "Julia, please, let me explain." She finally stopped, turned to him, and Michael saw the pain in her eyes, a pain he had caused. "You don't need to explain. I understood everything." "No, you don't understand. Patricia is a horrible person. She always has been. Don't listen to what she said." "It's not about what she said, Michael." Julia held Isabella close, protectively. "It's about what you didn't say. You stayed silent. You left me there being humiliated. And you didn't defend me." Michael felt the weight of guilt crush his chest. "I know I was wrong. I was a coward. But please don't go. Let me fix this." "Fix it?" Julia laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "How are you going to fix it, Michael? Are you going to make all those people accept me? Are you going to erase the fact that I'm poor, that I'm a cleaner, that I come from the Bronx? You can buy me pretty clothes, you can take me to expensive places, but you'll never change who I am, and apparently that's a problem." "It's not a problem for me," Michael said, desperate. "Julia, I love you and Isabella. None of that matters." "Then why did you stay silent? Why didn't you defend me?" Michael had no answer, or rather he did, but it was an answer that shamed him deeply, because he was afraid of judgment, afraid of exclusion, afraid of losing his place in the world he had always been a part of. And in that moment of weakness, he chose to protect himself instead of the woman he loved. Julia saw the truth, written on his face, and shook her head, tears falling freely now. "I have to go. Isabella is tired." "Julia, please." "No, Michael." She held up a hand, stopping him from getting closer. "You asked me to trust you. You promised you'd stay by my side. But at the first sign of trouble you abandoned me, and that I can't accept." She turned her back and started walking, And this time Michael didn't follow. He stayed there, alone on the busy sidewalk, watching the woman he loved walk away with the child who had become his reason for living. And he felt something break inside him, irreparably. Isabella looked back, her confused eyes searching for Michael, and cried out, "Daddy! Where are you going? Aren't you coming with us?" The word "Daddy" echoed in the night, and Michael felt his heart shatter completely. Julia quickened her pace, holding Isabella tighter, and they soon disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by the New York night. Michael stood there for long minutes, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. He had achieved something he never thought possible, a family, a place where he belonged, a reason to wake up every day. And in a moment of cowardice, of irrational fear, he had thrown it all away. When he finally went back inside the hotel, the event was proceeding as normal. People were laughing, toasting, making deals, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just lost the two most important people in his life. Patricia approached again, the venomous smile still on her face. "See, Michael, it's for the best. Now you can go back to normal, be with people on your own level." Michael looked at her with such profound contempt that the woman took a step back. "You know the difference between you and Julia. Julia has a heart. Julia has a soul. You just have venom and emptiness. And I would rather spend the rest of my life alone than one more minute with people like you." He turned and left the event, leaving Patricia speechless and everyone else staring. But it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered if he didn't have Julia and Isabella. Michael drove to their house, but when he arrived, the windows were dark. He knocked on the door, called out, pleaded, but there was no answer. Julia was inside. He was sure of it, but she didn't want to see him, and he couldn't blame her. He returned to his empty apartment, and for the first time in months, the silence was deafening. He was back in his old life, in that luxurious void, but now it was worse, because now he knew what he was missing. He knew the taste of belonging, of loving and being loved, and that knowledge made the loneliness 1,000 times more painful. The following days were the longest and most painful of Michael's life. He tried to work but couldn't concentrate. He checked his phone every minute, waiting for a message that never came. He drove to Julia's house every night, but the windows remained dark, and no one answered when he knocked. Isabella didn't go to school for the first few days, and Michael knew this because he called the office pretending to be a concerned relative. The teacher mentioned the girl was sick, which made Michael's heart ache even more. He wanted to be there, caring for her, helping, but he had lost that right. It was on the 5th day, when Michael was on the verge of despair, that Mr. Oswald showed up, at his company. The receptionist tried to stop him, but the older man simply walked in asking for the owner's office and wouldn't take no for an answer. Michael was in a meeting when his assistant informed him of an insistent visitor. He almost sent him away, but something in her tone made him hesitate. He excused himself from the executives and went out to meet Mr. Oswald. The cook was out of place in that corporate environment, with his work uniform and calloused hands, but he carried a dignity that made any attire seem appropriate. He looked Michael in the eye without fear or reverence, and got straight to the point. "I came here because Julia is not okay, neither is Isabella. The girl cries every night asking for you, and Julia tries to hide it, but she's destroyed." Michael felt his knees go weak. "I've tried to talk to her. I've gone there every day, but she won't answer." "Because she's scared," Mr. Oswald said. "Scared of believing again and being disappointed. You hurt her, son. Hurt her deep." "I know." Michael ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I was a coward. I should have defended her. I should have put those people in their place, but I was scared. Scared of what? Of losing my place, of being excluded, of being judged." Michael laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "How ridiculous is that? I've spent my whole life being judged for being in a wheelchair, and when I finally find someone who sees past it, I'm afraid of other people's judgment." Mr. Oswald was silent for a moment, then spoke, his voice softer. "Look, son, everyone's afraid. Julia is afraid every single day. Afraid she can't pay the bills, afraid she's not good enough for her daughter, afraid she'll never be accepted for who she is. But you know what she does with that fear? She gets up and fights anyway, because her love for Isabella is bigger than any fear. "And my love for them is too," Michael said, his voice firm. "I just need to prove it to her." "Then prove it, but not with words, with actions." After Mr. Oswald left, Michael cancelled all his meetings and began to think. Words wouldn't be enough. Julia was right not to trust mere promises. He needed to show her in a concrete and definitive way that he was committed to them, that it didn't matter what the world thought. He spent the entire night awake, planning, and when the sun rose, he knew exactly what to do. The next day, Michael returned to Julia's house, but this time he didn't go alone. He brought Mr. Oswald, Beatrice from the boutique, and 2 other people Julia knew and respected. He knocked on the door, and when Julia finally opened it, seeing all those people, she was confused. "Julia, please just listen to me," Michael said before she could close the door. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I betrayed your trust, but I'm here to prove that I'm serious, that you two are my priority, not just in words, but in deeds." Julia looked at the assembled people, all looking at her with kindness, and hesitated. "What do you want, Michael? I want you to forgive me. I want you to give me the chance to fix my mistake, and I want these people to witness my commitment to you and Isabella." Julia crossed her arms, defensive. "What kind of commitment?" Michael took a deep breath and in front of everyone said the words he had rehearsed all night. "Julia Sanchez, I love you. I love your strength, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you care for Isabella, the way you accepted me despite all my flaws. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that love. I want to be Isabella's father officially. I want to build a life with you, not in my world or in yours, but in our world, one we'll create together." Julia felt tears burn her eyes. "Michael, you can't just show up here and say that after—" "I know," Michael interrupted her. "That's why I brought witnesses. Mr. Oswald, who has always protected you, Beatrice, who treated you with respect from day one. And I want them all to know, and for you to know, that I'm serious. I'm selling my penthouse. I'm buying a house for the 3 of us in a place you choose. I'm making this official, legal, permanent. You and Isabella won't just be a part of my life. You will be my life." Julia's tears fell freely now. "And what if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and realize you've made a mistake?" "I won't change my mind, because for the first time in my life I've found where I belong, and it's with you." Isabella appeared behind Julia, her eyes swollen from crying for the past few days. When she saw Michael, her little face lit up. "Daddy, you came back!" The word broke Julia's last resistance. She saw her daughter run into Michael's arms, saw the way he held her, the way he cried as he hugged her, and she knew he was telling the truth, that his love was real. Michael looked at Julia over Isabella's head, his eyes pleading. "Julia, please, let me stay, let me be a part of this family." Julia took one step forward, then another, and finally allowed herself to fall into his arms. The 3 of them stood there, embraced in the doorway of that small house, while the witnesses watched with tears in their own eyes. "You promised me once you wouldn't leave," Julia said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "You broke that promise." "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I promise you again, Julia. This time I won't fail." And he didn't. In the months that followed, Michael kept every word he had said. He sold his penthouse apartment, put the money into a joint account with Julia, and together they looked for a house. They didn't want anything too big or ostentatious. They wanted a home. They found a simple but comfortable house in a middle-class neighborhood with 3 bedrooms, a small backyard where Isabella could play, and enough space for the 3 of them to live with dignity. Michael insisted on putting the house in Julia's name, saying he wanted her to feel secure, to know she would always have a roof over her head no matter what happened. Julia continued to work at the restaurant, but now only 1 shift, which allowed her to spend more time with Isabella. Michael continued to run his company, but learned to delegate, to trust his team, to not make work his sole identity. They created a new routine, a new life, breakfast together every morning before Isabella went to school, family dinners where each of them shared about their day, weekends at the park, at the movies, in simple places filled with joy. Michael faced criticism from his social circle. Some business friends drifted away, said he was making a mistake, that he was lowering himself. But he didn't care. He discovered he preferred the company of Mr. Oswald, who became a close friend, 1,000 times over that of the empty socialites who frequented the same fancy events. Julia faced challenges too. Some people in her community said she'd gotten lucky, that she'd landed a rich man. But she learned to ignore it. She knew the truth. She knew what they had was real, built on love, respect, and mutual commitment. Isabella flourished. She had a father now, officially. Michael had started the adoption process, and although it was bureaucratic and time-consuming, he was determined to do it right. He wanted Isabella to have his last name, wanted her to know, legally and emotionally, that he was her father. The girl started calling Julia and Michael Mom and Dad naturally, without being forced, and every time Michael heard that word, he felt his heart fill with a love he never knew he was capable of feeling. The months passed and Christmas approached again, 1 year since that night at the restaurant when a little girl had asked him why he was sad. 1 year since his life had completely changed. On the morning of December 25th, Michael woke up early in their new house, in the bed he shared with Julia. She was still asleep, her face serene, her hair spread across the pillow, and he just watched her, silently thanking whatever forces had brought them together. Isabella ran into the room, still in her pajamas, and jumped on the bed. "Dad! Mom! Wake up! It's Christmas! Santa came!" They got up, and Michael transferred to the wheelchair he always kept beside the bed. The three of them went to the living room, where a small but lovingly decorated Christmas tree waited, with presents underneath. They weren't expensive or extravagant gifts. They were simple things, chosen with love. Books for Isabella, a scarf Julia had mentioned she liked, a personalized mug that Isabella had helped Julia make for Michael with her drawing of their family. They opened the presents slowly, savoring each moment. Then they went to the kitchen and prepared Christmas lunch together. Rice, beans, stuffing, a roasted chicken that Julia had seasoned with care. Nothing sophisticated, nothing expensive, but made with love. They invited Mr. Oswald, who showed up with a dessert, and Beatrice, who had become a friend to Julia. They all sat at the table, a simple but full table, and Julia said the prayer of thanks. "Thank you, Lord, for this past year, for bringing us to each other, for showing us that family isn't about blood or money, but about love and choice. Thank you for this bountiful table, for this cozy home, for these wonderful people around me. And thank you, especially for Michael, who taught us that true love overcomes any obstacle." Michael squeezed her hand, tears running freely down his face. He looked around the table, at these people who had become his family, and felt a gratitude so profound it was almost physical. After lunch, when the guests had left and Isabella was playing in the yard with her new toys, Michael and Julia were alone in the living room. He pulled her onto the sofa, and they sat there, holding each other, watching Isabella through the window. "Are you happy?" Michael asked, needing to hear the answer. Julia looked at him, smiled that smile that lit up his world, and replied, "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "Me too," he kissed her forehead. "Do you know what I learned this year?" "What?" "That true luxury isn't having an expensive penthouse or imported cars. It's waking up next to the person you love. It's hearing a child call you Dad. It's having a place where you truly belong." Julia snuggled closer against him. "And you belong here, Michael, with us. Forever." "Forever," he repeated, and it was a promise he knew he would keep. That night, when Isabella was asleep in her own room decorated with her drawings, Michael and Julia stood on the back porch looking at the stars. New York rarely had a clear sky, but that night a few stars managed to shine through the light pollution. "It's been a year," Julia said thoughtfully. "A year since Isabella found you in that restaurant." Michael smiled. "She didn't find me, she saved me." Julia looked at him, questioning. "Saved you?" "Completely." Michael turned to her. "Julia, before I met you, I was just existing, working, accumulating money, but not really living. I thought I had everything, but I actually had nothing. And then a little girl asked me why I was sad, and my whole life changed. She showed me that I didn't have to be sad, that there was love in the world if I was brave enough to accept it. And you were brave, Julia said, her fingers intertwined with his. After you stumbled, after you made a mistake, you had the courage to come back, to fight for us. Because you're worth every fight, you're worth everything. They stood in a comfortable, complete silence. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. Each other's presence was enough. Inside, Isabella stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about school and presents. Julia smiled. She loves you so much. And I love her. I love you both more than I knew it was possible to love. Julia rested her head on his shoulder. You know it's not always going to be easy, right? We'll have problems, arguments, difficult times. I know, but we'll face them together, and that makes all the difference. Yes, she agreed. It really does. They went inside as the night air grew colder. Michael locked the door, checked the windows, a new routine he had developed of caring for the house, of protecting his family. Then he went to Isabella's room, adjusted the blanket she had kicked off, and stood there for a moment, just watching her sleep. Thank you, he whispered, not sure to whom. To Isabella, for finding him. To Julia, for giving him a chance. To the universe, for conspiring in their favor. Thank you. When he returned to their room, Julia was already in bed, waiting for him. Michael lay down beside her, and they held each other, two people whom fate had brought together in the most unlikely way. A rich businessman and a poor cleaner, a wheelchair and bare feet, a world of luxury and a small room in the Bronx. Everything said they shouldn't be together. But love doesn't care about those things. Love just happens when two souls recognize each other. And when it does, there is no barrier that can stop it, no prejudice that can destroy it, no social distance that can separate. Michael closed his eyes, feeling Julia's warmth beside him, hearing Isabella's soft breathing in the next room, and thought that finally, after 45 years of life, 23 of them in a wheelchair, years of loneliness and rejection, he had found his place in the world. It wasn't a luxurious penthouse, it wasn't a powerful office. It was here in this simple house with this incredible woman and this child who had taught him what truly mattered in life. Love, family, belonging. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was worth more than that. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Julia, and Isabella has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, overcoming obstacles and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which part resonated with you the most. Did you identify with Julia's courage, Michael's transformation, or little Isabella's saving innocence? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that true love knows no social barriers, that family is built on choices, and that it's never too late to start over. Your words inspire us to continue creating these narratives that warm the heart. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then, and may love always win in your life.